Welcome to another episode of EntheoRadio, where we talk about shamanism and consciousness. This is your captain speaking, Captain Hugh T Alkemi, and I'm here very excited with a very special guest, probably the most popular and most important guest that we've had in multiple years here on EntheoRadio, Dr. Rick Strassman. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Hugh. Good to be here.
Yeah. So Dr. Rick is a clinical research psychologist and a psychiatrist, and he's a founding member of the American Psychedelic Research Renaissance. He's like basically the person that started the research that stopped many, many years ago. I think you started in what, 1996 or 1993?
I gave my first dose of DMT in 1990.
1990. Okay. So yeah, you are like basically the new grandfather of the Renaissance era that we're in now. So, and then you're also author of the best-selling DMT, The Spirit Molecule. That's when I first heard about you. And I got very excited a long time ago as a very young man, and I wrote you an email, and I was very surprised that you kindly replied to my email, be it that you're so popular.
Well, you know, over the years, I've made it a policy to respond to every email. So I figured it's the least I can do to people that, or it's the least I could do for people who write me.
Yeah. And it's very wonderful that you've stayed humble. I think in our last episode on EntheoRadio, you talked a bit about your background. And in other interviews, I've heard that you grew up Jewish and you studied Zen Buddhism and a lot of very conscientious forms of meditation. I think transcendental meditation, was it?
In college, I learned TM, but it didn't quite appeal to me intellectually. And then a year or two later, I discovered Zen Buddhism and applied myself to that, fairly rigorously for, 22, 23 years.
Yeah, Zen Buddhism is a beast. It's like always changing. I guess it's one of the best, in my opinion, ways to tackle consciousness, because consciousness is always changing.
Well, it's quite simple, or at least the Zen I learned was very simple. You just sit and everything else kind of, follows suit.
Beautiful, brilliant. I'm going to practice that later today. So I got the new book. I'm not sure how many people out there have the new book. My excitement about reading this book, I've been telling people who haven't bought it yet that this book is like a prequel to your other books. What would you say if I said this is like the first book it should be out of order that people read?
A prequel. Well, that's an interesting way to look at it. It's a prequel and a sequel. It's a prequel in as much as it introduces the reader to the field, the psychedelic, drug field, and it draws upon all of the previous research which had been done in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. But at the same time, I couldn't have written it without everything else taking place after the Spirit Molecule book came out, because the Spirit Molecule book, that started American research. And in the process of writing the Psychedelic Handbook, I needed to get current on the field or in the field. And it was amazing. Even though I stopped my studies in 1995, I had been keeping relatively current on the scientific literature, but once push really came to shove and I needed to, learn, what the latest, research findings were, it really required a lot of study and tracking down, journal articles and whatnot. So, so the Spirit Molecule, started, the ball rolling in such a manner, that I, really needed to, get current on, what had occurred after the appearance of the Spirit Molecule.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's a prequel, but in a way, it couldn't have been written until after the Spirit Molecule came out.
Mhm. I think for the modern psychonauts, or psychedelic enthusiasts, or in entheogen practicing folks, this psychedelic handbook, and the subtitle is A Practical Guide to Psilocybin, LSD, Ketamine, MDMA, and DMT ayahuasca. This may tie it all together. I almost think of it like if you watch the original Star Wars trilogy and then you watch the 90s trilogy, it ties it together. And this book kind of is that tie for the other books.
Well, you know, it's interesting about the the motivation to write the handbook. Because of the increasing popularity of psychedelics, and everybody's kind of jumping into the game. There's a lot of the impressions that are being laid down aren't, I don't think, they're quite as accurate as they could be. There's a lot of hype, and there's a lot of commercial interest and money being poured into psychedelics. So it's kind of not, it isn't especially well balanced. And I think part of that is that people are talking about psychedelics, and they're writing books about psychedelics, and they're giving talks and doing documentaries, but they really don't have the background to know what they're talking about in a balanced manner. So I started to feel like I had some responsibility to the field, to keep it from going off from going off the rails. They're very powerful drugs. They can be very helpful. They can be very dangerous. And so I think one needs to keep a balanced perspective based on an understanding of the field, both psychological, spiritual, pharmacological, and whatnot. Newcomers to the field just don't give that balanced an approach.
Yep. So it's such a thorough book. I've been poring it over for the last few weeks since I got it, like 2 weeks since I got it. It just came on sale, right? It was published this month in August.
It came out on the 9th. Yeah. The same day I had my interview with Joe Rogan.
I heard about that. How was that? Was it fun and exciting? I haven't watched it yet.
It was great. Yeah. Well, I've known Joe a long time. We first talked on the phone in 2005.
Okay.
It was, just as he was, discovering DMT and, talking about it. And, we met for coffee in 2009 on Ventura Boulevard. I'm in Sherman Oaks at a Starbucks. So there were a few opportunities over the years, to appear on his show, but the time didn't quite seem right until this new, this new book was coming out. So we timed the interview to correspond, to the release date. From start to finish, we were in the studio for about 4 hours, and we took some bathroom breaks, and I think the whole interview is about 3 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah, I got to dig into that. That sounds exciting. Some of my friends mentioned that, and I was like, oh wow, I didn't know that you have been on that recently. Yeah,
I was just in Austin last week. And I've got all these book orders. People can order the book through my website, in which case I will sign and inscribe it. But I wasn't quite anticipating the number of requests that came in. Is over 200 right now. So the last couple of days, all I've been doing is I've got my my Sharpie, and I'm addressing all these envelopes. So hopefully, and the books are on the way. I still don't have my shipment, so hopefully people can be patient.
Yeah, I can't believe it. In your lifetime, you're not only seeing like some of the most amazing research and participating in it and founding a renaissance, but your books are best-selling, super popular, and you're almost doing it with this one from a grassroots perspective. Like you're signing everything. That's amazing to me.
Well, the ones that come through my website anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
you can buy it on Amazon, Barnes and
Right.
Noble, whatnot. But still, it's a more personal touch. Um, well, the interesting thing about my career, if I could kind of put
Please.
it in some perspective. I ran my studies from 90 to 95, and that was it. I mean, there was no one giving DMT in the world. There was one study in the US giving psychedelics. And I couldn't really put together a team because there were no players out there. So I mostly figured out what I wanted to from the DMT work and the psilocybin work too. Actually, we studied psilocybin a bit. And I figured, I've done my part for the movement. Let's see what happens. So I wrapped things up at the University of New Mexico in 1995, and then just practiced psychiatry, for the next 13 years in both community mental health and in private practice, psychotherapy, prescribing antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety agents, lithium, whatnot. And I wrote the book, but still, I was living in small towns. People really didn't know much about my work. They figured I was just Dr. Strassman, the psychiatrist, down the road. So it's kind of weird and kind of gratifying, that our work has been in a way validated and discovered, and I'm still alive to enjoy the recognition that work brought to the field.
Yeah, and part of that is living well and kind of settling your emotional system, probably through your spiritual practices.
Well, psychotherapy, spiritual practices, my relationship with psychedelics is a bit, what's the word, fraught. It's kind of, complicated. Yeah, I'm in a way that study opened, Pandora's box, because it, got things off the ground, and I, kind of guided other studies, planning and inception afterwards. Some things are going well with the field. Some things could use a little bit of mid-course correction. Psychedelics are just so so powerful. And once you unleash that into the public arena, they're bound to be misused, and that kind of is a responsibility too.
Yeah, and thank you for remaining in that space of helping us younger folks course correct and not have a backlash like maybe early 60s and 70s created.
Well, I think we're kind of heading in that direction again with the legalization and decriminalization movements. I think it's going to be, well, the thinking behind increasing accessibility is that these are panaceas, and it's easy to take them. They're challenging experiences as opposed to chronic psychosis as a result of misuse or taking the wrong drug in the wrong person at the wrong time. So I think by glorifying the potential benefits and by minimizing the potential adverse reactions, I think there are going to be people taking psychedelics who shouldn't, without a lot of supervision, which isn't available. And I think there are going to be increased emergency room visits and suicides and psychiatric hospitalizations, and I think we need to be prepared, for responding, to that, set of circumstances, which I think is inevitable with increased accessibility.
Yeah, and so what is your opinion about if you've researched any of the current programs and or recommendations stateside, probably like Oregon, for example, and Denver, where they're talking about psychedelic therapist licensing or coursework, or have you gone through any of those courses, and is there a Strassman seal of approval yet?
No, I haven't, looked at any of those curricula. Well, that state bill in California got shut down a week or two ago.
I think I heard about that.
It was just, it was really going to open, the floodgates. And instead, the legislature just decided to, fund, more studies of what to do, as opposed to actually, giving, the green light to increased accessibility. The Oregon program, I've heard of. I haven't been involved myself really, but like in a way, it's comparable. It isn't exactly comparable, but it's kind of comparable. Psychedelics are so strong and so powerful, especially in full doses. You can, in a way, equate them, with electroconvulsive therapy, shock therapy in a way.
Oh.
So are you going to just, let somebody, do shock therapy who's had, 3 months of training and, they're not, clinicians in the first place. They're just people interested in doing this work.
Okay.
So I think you really need to take seriously the potential outcomes, and you really need to be grounded, I think, in either clinical work or spiritual work or shamanic work, to be able to handle the states that are going to come up when you give psychedelics to people. So I think it'll mostly be okay in Oregon, but it's not going to be great. And Colorado, I'm not sure what the status is yet there with the legal situation.
I think it's just Denver. They've decriminalized psilocybin, and there was some rumor about the state decriminalizing every substance at a certain quantity, but I don't think that actually passed.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the interesting things about Oregon is, that counties, can decide on their own if they're going to allow this to happen. And a lot of the counties in Oregon are, saying, that they're not interested, that they don't, want to legalize, psilocybin in their counties. So it may be limited even in Oregon, to specific areas, rather than the rural counties.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd like to look more into that. I don't travel a lot. I'm out here in Arizona now instead of in San Diego. Our last interview, I was living in San Diego.
Okay.
And I was spearheading that decriminalize California movement for psilocybin. And I think that's probably the one that got shut down. We got pushed back with COVID, and then the voting didn't work in the favor.
Yeah. It was just a week or two ago, that the legislature kind of put the kibosh on it.
Yeah. Oh, well, we're going to be ready when we're ready. As you know, everything is flowing in the way of things.
Yeah. I think the key is to educate people that are giving psychedelics, educate people that are taking them, educate the regulators and the legislators. So that's, one of the main goals of, my new book is, to educate as opposed to advocate or, excrete. I don't, come off as an advocate of, taking psychedelics. In fact, I discuss the adverse effects of psychedelics in that book more than, the potential benefits, because you can look anywhere nowadays and find out about the potential benefits. But very few people are talking about it. Adverse effects. The most you hear about is hype, versus hope. That's the motto of a conference that's coming up in Amsterdam, I think, in the next few weeks. Hype versus hope. But still, it isn't, hype versus hope versus horror. I think there's, still a tendency to kind of, gloss over, the potential adverse effects.
Yeah, there's a few sections in your book where you outline the different tag names for psychedelics, and we break down into empathogens, entheogens, enactogens, and then the psychedelic term. I think using that tactic of helping people understand the vocabulary of the psychedelic world is very important as to how they get up their right set and setting, what substances are safe to start with. And then your book, while it is explanative, is a handbook, it feels cautionary in every other paragraph, which is really where our culture needs to be at. And, like you talked about hype versus hope versus horror, there really is a three-legged stool of this structure that we're building here. And yes, everyone talks about the hype. Everyone talks about the hope. But where are the bad trips these days? And there are some, and it seems like it's almost taboo to even talk about bad trips.
Right, I know. Yeah, it's taboo. It's even taboo to talk about bad trips within the research community.
Huh.
Yeah. So yeah, they're kind of minimized. Well, one of the letters that was sent to the California legislature in opposition to opening the floodgates for psychedelics was written by the mother of a Berkeley student, I think, at UC Berkeley, who was into an entheogenic mystical experience. Smart kid, well-adjusted, had friends, good student, and he took a big dose of mushrooms. And he got extremely anxious, and they called the EMTs, I think, or called the police, and people knocked on the door, and he panicked, and he went to the cupboard to drink something, and he drank a big amount of protein powder, because he thought it was like juice or something, and he died. From asphyxiation. And there were a couple of other cases that the mother wrote about in this cautionary letter to the legislature in California, saying not so fast, let's look at adverse effects, how are we going to minimize them, how are we going to educate people out there. Yeah, it isn't even only the drugs too, it's the set and the setting. Like if you're expecting a certain thing to happen and it doesn't, then what? Are you going to be depressed? You're going to be disheartened? You're going to think that you're some kind of failure? You could be, taken advantage of, by people that are administering the drugs as well. So it isn't only, that you have a bad trip. There's a number of other variables that come into play determining the outcome.
Yeah, that set and setting, that container, psycho-spiritual healing container, wellness container, it's really, really important. And I mean, I've helped to set up a lot of good containers, and you never know. Like, you never know what a person's going to go through.
You never know.
And yeah, and it's amazing. In fact, I'd like to kind of hail back to some of the research you did. People had difficult, challenging, and scary experiences with intravenous DMT, right?
Yeah, a number did. Even though we just screened people through the wazoo, and it was all up and up. There was nothing illegal about it. It was 100% or 99.99% pure DMT. These were all experienced, psychedelic users. They were all normal volunteers, and all of them were stable, like in school, family, friends, work, things like that. Yeah, and still, one guy developed some panic attacks after a big dose of DMT, and he was a hypnotherapist actually, and was able to treat himself, and he returned to the study and did fine. A couple of people, with a background of depression, way in the distance, they develop recurrences of their depression.
Yeah.
But they responded quickly, either to getting back on medication or getting back into therapy. Some guy experienced being raped anally by crocodiles.
Oh.
His first big DMT trip. It just pinned to the bed. Somebody else just went crazy on psilocybin. Figured that I was blocking his telephone, and he put him and he kind of barricaded himself into the corner of the room.
Oh.
It ended up running down the hall with security guys unable to catch up to him.
Wow.
So even in the best of circumstances, with all that screening, psychiatric screening, medical screening, good supervision, me and a nurse, there are still adverse effects. So in the field, it's going to be even more challenging, I think, for people to minimize problems.
Right. I was just speaking with somebody who wrote me a couple questions that we have from the Phoenix Psychedelic Club here. He was one of the organizers, and he's like, we could do salvia journeys that people would like that. I'm like, well, as long as people sign consent forms and they let us detain their physical bodies for that 5 minutes while they're tripping, sure.
Salvia, it's kind of hair raising.
Mm-hmm.
You need somebody in the room who's stronger than you are.
Because people go running down the street and push. They don't know what they're doing.
Well, they're interacting with their hallucinations. They just can't. Well, that happened to me. I smoked some salvia back in the day, or salvinorin. It was just discovered to be smokably active. This was 93, 94 or so. I was married at the time, and the guy that gave us the drug said, lock the doors, make sure the keys to the car are nowhere around. Wow. And it was very good advice, because it was November, it was blowing like hell up at our mountain house. And I wanted to go outside, to just, see how my truck was. I wanted to start it up and see if it still drove. And it was, kind of a good, lesson, that it's unpredictable, what happened to you.
Yeah. So you actually got up and tried to walk for the door and get the keys and stuff?
Well, I wanted to go outside, and it was November. It was dark. It was blowing. It was probably 10 degrees with 30-mile-an-hour winds. And I was looking for my keys. I said, where are my keys? Where are my keys?
Oh man!
And my wife said, I'm not telling you.
Right. Well, at least she was the sober party in that incident, right?
Yeah. It would have been hard cheese without her around.
Yeah. Man, that's the stuff that's possible now. There was a scene, I think it came from the DMT movie documentary. Joe Rogan's in that, right?
Yeah, he's the narrator.
And he dresses a little bit like an MIB agent. He looks...
Well, it's kind of a takeoff on the Twilight Zone and Rod Serling.
Okay, in a suit. Was there a dialogue that occurred either between you and the government, or a trip that somebody described where there was MIB, Men in Black, coming to visit you? What was that?
Oh yeah, Spiro. Spiro was one of our volunteers. Well, so NIDA was very interested in our work. The people that were funding the research, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, a division of the National Institutes of Health. And they funded my study because they were very interested in the psychopharmacology of psychedelics. Nobody had done a study like that in the U.S. in 20 years. And I got FDA approval, DEA approval, and we were giving DMT. Mm-hmm. So after like a year or two, a couple of the guys from NIDA came by. And, they were your typical, government bureaucrats, black suits and white shirts and black ties. Yeah, yes. So they were in the room when I gave Spiro his big dose of DMT, and it was a big trip. And Spiro was kind of going on about it. Yeah, and those poor guys from the government. I mean, they were just kind of scratching their heads and trying to keep a straight face. But yeah, I think it blew their minds too.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and watch that. It's been a couple years, 3, maybe 4 years since I've seen that. Where is it streamed now? People can download it or stream it?
It's free on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great. So let me, I can go into microdosing. I actually kind of want to go back into nitpicking the book a bit, if that's all right. Why did you take such a broad angle? And you started talking about more than just DMT in this book. You wanted to kind of cover as much that was out there.
Yeah, well, it was part of the discussion with my publisher, with Ulysses Press. We met and we talked, and they said, what do you want to write? And I said, well, I could write a book on, the classical psychedelics, kind of an overview, like a handbook. And they said, well, could you include MDMA and ketamine? And I said, well, I could. I'm really not an expert on either of those, but I could bone up if, that's what you want. So, yeah, I've written a book on DMT, and it was it was like a story of the DMT study, as opposed, to a textbook or a handbook. Mm-hmm. And it was specifically DMT, and specifically its effects in their research environment. So I took a broad perspective, because I wanted to provide an educated expert overview to the field as a whole.
Is it that, I maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I know Timothy Leary was very suggestive of ketamine as being an important substance for spiritual development. Is that something you came across in your research?
You mean John Lilly?
I don't know if it was Lilly or Leary.
Yeah, Tim was into classical compounds, like LSD, psilocybin.
Yeah.
The main advocate, for ketamine, back in the 1960s and the 1970s, was a psychiatrist whose name was John Lilly.
Okay, about that.
Yeah. So he wrote a book called The Center of the Cyclone, and it's about his experiments or self-experiments, with ketamine, there is a lot of interest in ketamine. It's the only quasi psychedelic that's FDA approved, and it's been around for a long time too. So it's seeing use as an antidepressant, anti-anxiety, couples therapy, pain, antidepressant, those kind of things. So I had to learn about ketamine. It's an interesting drug. It's a club drug. You snort it, like white powder, and you can abuse it. I've heard stories. People buy powdered ketamine and they just use it until it's up, till it's over, till till they've snorted it all. So there is some dependency which is associated with ketamine. That being said, there's a lot of ketamine clinics out there. There's a prescription form of spray ketamine. Is an isomer of ketamine. One of the hands of ketamine, either the left or the right hand, and that's been FDA approved. It's extremely expensive, and it doesn't really offer any advantages to generic ketamine, which is incredibly cheap. If you're careful in prescribing it and you're careful taking it, it's a useful medication. And I think, one of its functions was, I think, to begin to get people, thinking about clinics to give psychedelics, to people in. Like, what do you need? Do you need a psychotherapist? What kind of preparation? What kind of room? What kind of follow-up? What are the criteria or the qualifications, to be a ketamine therapist? So I think it's been quite useful in, kind of opening the conversation about, setting issues, within the medical environment.
Excellent. Okay. All right. That's a good opinion. Now, when you say classical psychedelics, we're going back to like LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, DMT.
Right.
These are the things you have the most experience with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that because of your chosen path of mystical experiences and growing through those, or is that because of the access that these things provide to research, change, transformation?
Yeah, well, the classical, compounds are the oldest. Mescaline, within peyote, it was discovered in the 1890s. LSD in the 40s. Psilocybin in the 50s or the 60s. So they occur in nature. They've been around a long time. Most of the research, pharmacological research, psychiatric research, spiritual research, has taken place, with the classical compounds. There's ayahuasca. There's a lot of studies taking place around ayahuasca now as well. Ketamine is, relatively new. It's a synthetic. It's got a unique pharmacology. It's kind of, one of a kind. MDMA is, relatively, new, at least in terms of its application within psychotherapy. And it's also synthetic. And it's, kind of toxic too if you take too much.
Right.
Most of the animal data, which, continued being accumulated, during the hiatus in clinical research, accumulated around the classical compounds. The serotonin receptors and all that. Those were discovered through studies in animals of LSD in the 70s and the 80s. So there's the most is known about the classical compounds, and they've got the longest history of use. Plus they're the safest. There's no inherent toxicology or toxic effects of the classical compounds. Obviously you can hurt yourself if you're too stoned. But there's no neurological damage. There's no chromosomal damage.
All right. Well, that's an excellent way of putting it. I've always just stuck to into the place personally where it's like if I know it occurs in nature and I can take care of it with my level of personal expertise, which I'm pretty sciencey, then I could do it. I've never done ketamine. I've never done MDMA. I've done 5-methoxy-DMT, and I would love to save that for the end conversation where we talk about the toad and stuff like that. And I've done ayahuasca, and you've done ayahuasca too, right?
Yeah, maybe 20, 30 times. Yeah.
Okay. Let's for our listeners, we're talking to Dr. Rick Strassman. He is an amazing book author and psychiatrist, and we're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back. This is EntheoRadio.
Yeah, that's good timing.
Hey, welcome back to EntheoRadio. This is Hugh T Alkemi. I'm here with Dr. Rick Strassman, and we are discussing his new book, the Psychedelic Handbook. And we've been talking about ayahuasca, DMT, ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin, and LSD, amongst others. Is there anything that in that cover description is in the book that really isn't? I guess you didn't mention mescaline on that cover. There's other stuff in there that is besides mescaline that we haven't discussed or described?
Well,
is there like 2CB in there or anything unusual?
No, I just referred to how mescaline.
Ibogaine.
was the template for the development of a lot of other phenethylamines by Shulgin.
Okay.
I talk about salvia, and salvia divinorum.
Salvia and ibogaine, yeah.
Yeah, and I talk about ibogaine.
Yeah, go into ibogaine a little bit. We don't talk about that on my show very much, but like I think there's a section of your book which I really praise you for. This is you've labeled things, and you even have onaerogens in there, and so both salvia and ibogaine tend to be onaerogenic, whether they're dreamlike or maybe you can actually break down that terminology and then go into those two.
Yeah, the term, the term refers to generating dreams. The term is onaerogen. Yeah, it isn't an especially commonly used term. Usually, it's applied to ibogaine. But I don't think that ibogaine subjective effects are distinct from other classical compounds. I think that we still need to do like a head-to-head comparison of the phenomenology. To actually propose with any rigor that the subjective effects of ibogaine are unique relative to, let's say, LSD. There was a German study last year, I think, comparing LSD with psilocybin. And the subjective the subjective effects were indistinguishable. The only difference was the time course. Psilocybin a shorter acting than LSD. So I think that kind of study also could take place comparing ibogaine with other compounds like LSD. To determine if ibogaine merits its own descriptive terminology.
Okay, and so I know there's ibogaine clinics. Is this something that you've administered for people or been through, observed, or anything like that?
Well, I took ibogaine, once. Yeah, it's pretty striking. I've never been around, people that have taken ibogaine. I've never administered it. I'm good friends, colleague with Deborah Mash, and I knew Howard Lotsoff. Those were the two main pioneers in ibogaine. Deborah is still studying ibogaine. She's got a company, and they're doing phase 1 studies right now, actually.
And is that, I know it interrupts like addictive, like biochemical addictive behaviors or markers or something like that. It's really great for addiction treatment, but is it toxic?
It can be if you're not careful. The main concern is what's called the QTC interval. It's part of the EKG, the electrocardiogram. That little the tracing that you see like on monitors in hospital rooms. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. Right. So it prolongs the space between two of those peaks, and if the space becomes too prolonged, it can cause arrhythmias, which could be fatal. But if you're under medical supervision, Deborah published a paper a few years back. It was a very extensive series of patients withdrawn from alcohol, cocaine, and opiates, I think, and there were no deaths. But you have to be quite careful with potassium levels, magnesium levels. You need to monitor people carefully. With a cardiogram, but compared to other classical compounds, it's got significantly more toxicity. That could be the metabolite of ibogaine, which is toxic. It's not certain yet, but it could be. It's the metabolite, which is called noribogaine. The psychedelic effects seem to occur when the blood levels of the parent compound, the ibogaine, are high, And then there's a conversion in the body from ibogaine to noribogaine, and the noribogaine seems to be responsible for both the anti-addictive properties, and also possibly the cardiac toxicity.
Okay. And then there's salvia. Some people report to have with salvia experiences following them on the subsequent evening. When they get to sleep, they have more dreams, or they have more weird, vivid dreams, or lucid dreaming, stuff like that. Would you say that salvia is somehow connected to an after effect?
Yeah, I've got to admit that I'm not that current. I'm either I'm current with the pharmacological research, the psychiatric research with salvia, but underground, I'm not all that familiar with what people are reporting in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Increase dreaming at night. I hadn't heard of that. I mean, it's certainly possible. It is a unique compound. It activates one of the opioid receptors, the kappa opioid receptor, which is unique. The classical compounds stimulate the serotonin 2A receptor. MDMA causes release of norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. Ketamine is an NMDA receptor antagonist. So salvia is unique among the compounds I discuss in my book as being a kappa opioid stimulating compound. I'm not familiar with the role of the kappa site in dreams.
Okay.
There are other kappa compounds out there, which are used for analgesia, for pain relief. But those are pretty new compounds. They're still pretty, niche, and I don't know much about them.
I'm going to transition to. Hold on a sec. I got some pop up here. I'm going to transition to asking you a question about psilocybin containing mushrooms and the species in general of mushrooms that are classical mushrooms, not argothyloid containing. Do you think that baeocystine or norbaeocystine, these other tryptamines that are kind of odd in the psilocybe species mushrooms, have some sort of a medical and or microdosing value?
I don't know. And I don't know if there's, much in the way of hard science, to say one way or the other. People talk about the entourage effect, with mushrooms.
Yeah.
Like the main compound, the main psychoactive compound is psilocybin. But the other, compounds like the ones you mentioned, could contribute to the specific quality of the experience. It's like terpenes are responsible for some of the qualitative differences in cannabis strains, even though the most potent and main compound is THC. That's called the entourage effect.
Yeah, and I love that entourage effect, the new material that's coming out about that. Do you feel like there's like a bunch of people now who are doing, especially in Colorado, classical psychedelic setting, but they're using things like THC and cannabis and stuff like that? Is it that it translates? You feel like maybe that translates to a classical psychedelic experience if you do enough cannabis?
Yeah. Well, the fellow that's been doing that up in Boulder is Daniel McQueen, who I've known for a long time, and he wrote a book a few years back called Psychedelic Cannabis, and he's been doing psychedelic cannabis circles for a long time. And apparently you mix the right strains together and you get people as stoned as you can, as fast as you can. and you lay them down with headphones and eye shades, and they do trip out. It's kind of DMT-like. It's visual, out of body, quite extreme. So when I was writing the book, I was thinking about including cannabis and Daniel's protocol and all that, but it just was a little too far afield.
Yeah.
The pharmacology is different. The legal stuff, the history, all that with cannabis is just too big, to include in a book of a bunch of other compounds. It pretty much deserves a book of its own.
Well, I appreciate that opinion. You're the third person to mention Daniel McQueen on this show this year, so I'm excited about one day asking him some direct questions.
Yeah, you should get him on your show.
Yeah. All right. Well, so in the book, you go into microdosing. And I can kind of tell based on your author's voice that you're unsure about it. Give us
skeptical.
You're skeptical, okay?
Yeah, I would
tell us about what your opinions are on microdosing. You wrote a whole chapter on it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you need to define what you mean by microdosing. So I think I divide microdosing into three categories. One is tiny.
Nanodosing, all right.
I think one is. Let me hold on. Here. Microdose doses. Yes.
Good dog-eared the page.
Yeah, so tiny, very small, and small are the three categories. Okay. Tiny doses, you don't feel anything at all. Like zero, like a sugar pill.
Sure.
And so there's no acute subjective effects acutely. Like you wouldn't, it would be like drinking water. But if you take microdoses or very, very small doses like that on a regular basis, you could be exerting the kinds of effects on the brain which are seen with the antidepressants, like the SSRIs. You could down-regulate postsynaptic serotonin sites, which would improve your mood. You might be slightly depressed and you microdose on an inactive dose every day or every few days, and it could have an SSRI like effect. It also could be stimulating neurogenesis and neuroplasticity independent of any acute subjective effect. So the next step up are very small doses, and that would be let's say 10 micrograms of LSD if you wanted kind of a ballpark figure, and you do have a acute subjective effect, but it's kind of generic. It's a bit stimulating. It's like caffeine, and you could take it for the caffeine-like effects. Some sharper focus, some better attentions, some more alertness. So there would be an acute subjective effect, and depending on your regimen, how often you were taking it, it could also have those antidepressant-like effects, the pharmacological effects. And the slightly higher doses are, what I call the small doses, which should be, maybe 20, 25 micrograms of LSD. And you do get a sparkle. It provides an intimation of what would happen if you increase the dose even more. So most of the studies out there have been field studies, survey studies, internet questionnaires, and there's only a very small number of laboratory studies, and only one of them is multiple dosing. Every other one is very small doses. They're not the tiny doses, and they're not the small doses. They're the in between very small doses. So people do feel something, and there are some EEG effects brain imaging effects. But the effects are not what people report necessarily as the benefits of microdosing. And there was just a study came out, Scientific Reports, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and it was a double-blind placebo-controlled study in the field. They sent people. Oh no, I'm not sure where they got the drug. But it was a more rigorous study, and people reported an effect, but they only reported an effect if they were experienced with macrodoses previously. So there's still this huge overlay of placebo and suggestibility and selection bias, and you get what you expect. So far the scientific data are pretty meager. That's not to say that placebo effects are not important. There's a lot of important things that happen through placebo, and the majority of the improvement with antidepressants is a placebo effect. There's placebo analgesia, which is effective. It's reversed, by naloxone. So it involves opioids that the brain, makes on their own in response to the suggestibility of the placebo response. So it could be that these super small doses are just kind of stimulating the placebo response, which is not a bad thing if it helps your mood, helps your creativity, helps your energy.
Absolutely. So you're using LSD as a model here. Do you feel like when you scale this into psilocybin mushrooms that it's too inconsistent because it is powdered mushrooms and every grow is different, right?
Yeah. When it comes to mushrooms, you would just have to, do kind of trial and error.
Right.
Tim Fadiman's book on microdosing, the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, I think he says start with 1/10 of an active dose as your microdosing dose.
Okay, I'm back. I see myself.
You still there?
Oh, yeah, we're still here.
Yeah. I was charging my cell phone and it became charged and went beep beep, and then I lost you for a second.
Yeah, you're out there in the sticks. So
I'm really out there in the sticks, and I've got a flip phone too, which probably
cool.
doesn't help.
I might be buying one of those tomorrow. I feel
flip phones are great. You don't spend all your time staring at your phone.
You close it. It doesn't just light up and show you a screen in the middle of the night.
You close it.
Right, it's done.
Bye. Yeah.
So what we were saying there before we kind of cut out is that psilocybin mushrooms powdered. James Fadiman's book was 1/10 of a gram. What is that?
Well,
milligrams?
1/10 of an active dose.
1/10 of an active dose. So an active dose on each different species, each different grow might be different.
Right.
And it's also subjective to the doser. Maybe their active dose is 1 gram. Maybe their active dose is 1/2 gram, depending on their body weight, background.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it's finding that sweet spot. That's a tricky thing. I think there's a lot of people out there trying to ride the psilocybin mushroom powdered supplements game.
If there's a buck to be made.
Right. Oh, so I'm going to give you a couple questions that have come in from the psychedelic group, meetup group of Phoenix, Arizona. And the organizer, Adam S., he writes, how is the future looking for continuous IV administered DMT, including its experimental and therapeutic potential? So he wants to know about the future of DMT IV.
Yeah. Well, toward the end of my DMT book, I suggest that because there isn't any tolerance to closely spaced repeated dosing of DMT, that if you want to spend more time in that space, you can do a continuous intravenous infusion. Most psychedelics like LSD, for example, if you take it every day after 3 to 4 days, you stop responding. But that hadn't been established either in animals or in humans with DMT previously. So I thought, well, maybe you need to space them more closely together. So we did a study giving a big dose every half hour, 4 times in the morning, and there wasn't any tolerance. People got as intoxicated on dose 4 as they did on dose 1. So using that idea or using those data, I thought, if you want to spend more time in that state, you could just do a continuous infusion, kind of like anesthesia. And Andrew Gallimore approached me a few years back and wanted to write a theoretical paper about how you would do that using the anesthesia model. So we published that, I think, in 2016. And then a group at Imperial College, picked up the ball and started doing it. And they just published a poster. And I spoke to one of the volunteers as well. I'm a Brit. So they got the infusion going for a steady half hour. So you were in the DMT space for a half hour as opposed to just for 2 to 5 minutes. And they gave 4 so they infused it at 4 different infusion rates to experiment with going up and down. So I think if you can keep people in that state, you could characterize the state at a little more leisurely pace than is the case when you smoke it or inject it, just quick in, quick out. You can orient, you can establish your bearings with the beings in there if you happen to encounter them. You could also, I think it would be a useful tool as well for psychotherapy. Depending on what's going on and with the patient, they would either want to come down and discuss what's going on. They might want to re-enter at a very high dose and just go forward, or they may want to be just slightly intoxicated and work on stuff more consciously and alertly. So I think it's got both beneficial effects, both Hugh experientially, to characterize the state in greater detail. And I think it would also, be useful, therapeutically. It is complicated. You have an infusion pump, and you need to, keep things, fairly well adjusted. Yeah. The model that we developed, giving closely spaced, doses, 4 times in the morning, I think in a way is more practical. And I'm consulting with a group at UCLA and the VA I'm in Los Angeles, which is interested in using that model to treat veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Interesting.
You can be more flexible with respect to the interval if you're doing psychotherapy. It could be every half hour, it might be every hour, it might be every 2 hours. But you want to keep the momentum going. In that study that we did, even though we were only looking at normal volunteers, people were still able to work through things over the course of the morning. Not, everybody's got problems that they're working on, and there was a real common sequence. The first dose kind of oriented you in the space. The second dose, kind of clarified what issues that you're working on. The third dose would kind of exhaust you. You didn't think you could break through, and the fourth dose routinely it provided a breakthrough and resolution of whatever things they were working on at the time. So I think it's a useful model which wouldn't be as complicated as a continuous infusion.
What benefits can someone anticipate if they're in that exact model under the right set and setting, do you think that they'll recover from PTSD relatively quickly, or?
Well, I would think it would be along the lines of what we're seeing with the MDMA PTSD studies. People start to feel better that day.
Yeah.
They're able to emote and abreact and remember things in a different way, come to terms with things that feel feelings which they've been keeping the lid on. Retrieving memories which may have been forgotten or otherwise suppressed. It would be like it would be an amplification of the normal psychotherapeutic process, which occurs with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy.
Interesting. So this is, are you talking about like the toad, bufotenin, or 5-methoxy-DMT, or are you talking about NN-DMT when you talk about intravenous DMT?
Oh, it's just DMT. Yeah.
Okay, so NN and 5-methoxy are completely separate, and this is like a chemical lab-made DMT, pure.
Well, DMT is NN dimethyltryptamine, and you could either extract it from plants or you can make it in the lab.
Okay.
5-methoxy, DMT, it is in the toad, the toad venom, or you can make it in the lab as well. They're closely related compounds. There's like methoxy group on the DMT, and that gives you 5-methoxy-DMT. But the chemistry is a bit different. The subjective effects are usually a bit different.
Do you have a professional opinion on all the DMT vaping and freebasing that's going on with either one of those? Because I think DMT vape pens are becoming really popular.
DMT vape pens are popular. 5-methoxy-DMT vape pens are popular. Yeah. Well, user beware. Well, 5-methoxy, DMT, frequently, gives you the ego dissolution kind of whiteout experience. Completely blows your mind. You've seen, some of those, videos, like on, Hamilton, Morris's, show, people flopping around and screaming and that kind of stuff, and they have, no recollection of what they've done. And I'm not sure if that's all, that helpful, for the, for the common man. I think you want, to be able to, hang your hat on some content, which is more, commonly, the case with DMT. 5-methoxy-DMT also, causes a lot more in the way of flashbacks, or what they call it, reactivations. Like panic attacks in the middle of the night, and a lot of anxiety afterwards. And I think it's because that just being completely fried in the white light, it can be traumatic. Not everybody finds that all that useful.
So I was just I've been hunting mushrooms here in Arizona. The rains and monsoon season have been pretty intense. You have monsoons over there in New Mexico. You guys get the DMT toads? As I was down in Tucson, and they were all over the parking lot when we had Mexican food the other night. They were big DMT toads, the Sonoran desert toads.
Well, yeah. Well, so those are, so the compound in the toads is not DMT.
Right.
5-methoxy-DMT.
Isn't it called bufotenin or something like that?
Well, there is, but it's, there is a compound, which is called bufotenin, which occurs in, some of the snuffs, from the Amazon, and also occurs in the skin of some toads. But it's unclear if bufotenin is psychoactive or not. Jonathan Ott, OTT, believes it is. But there just are, there aren't a lot of data on bufotenin. The active ingredient in the venom of the toad is 5-methoxy-DMT.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole campaign. Apparently, you're not supposed to pester the toads. They're protected. They're endangered or whatever. So we picked one up and took pictures with it. But if the police had rolled up on us picking up a toad, I guess we could have been cited for that.
Well, if you were extracting the venom,
Uh,
from the venom glands
right.
with the intention of using it, you could be cited.
Okay.
If you were just holding the toad and you were transporting it across state lines, you wouldn't be cited. But it is illegal to transport them across state lines, and it's illegal to use their venom for psychedelic effects.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, they seemed like a pretty peaceful sort of thing, but they were everywhere, all over the roads.
Yeah. Well, toads are generally peaceful. I don't think you have to worry about them.
Right. So, words of wisdom. I'm gonna wrap it up with this, because speaking of peaceful, speaking of sitting there like a toad all year long doing nothing in the desert, you've got a lot of experience with this. You sit in your zazen meditation. You are an elder, and I always see the toads with their skin that dries out in the desert, and I think, oh, that must be like an elder being right there.
Yeah.
Well, where are we going? What are your words of wisdom for the psychonauts who are taking the big doses, and following in the vein of heroic doses with Terence McKenna suggestions? And or where are we going with the safety protocols with the microdosing? Like, where do you see this going?
Where do I see it going? Well, it can go in any number of ways. Some good, some bad, and some kind of in between. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of psychedelic possibilities. There's going to be another Charles Manson. I'll bet my bottom dollar on that. There's going to be terrorists who take LSD to become more dedicated terrorists. There's going to be a lot of people attaining spiritual experiences, which then have to be integrated and incorporated into their lives. There's going to be psychotherapeutic advances. There's going to be new compounds. There's going to be competition, I think, among compounds, depending on the manufacturer. There's a book by Philip K. Dick called The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, and it's about a competition in a way between one company is an interstellar company, which makes this very weird psychedelic, and it's competing with a with an Earth-based company, which makes another psychedelic, and it's like a competition for what compound is the majority of the human race going to be consuming every day or every time they want to get high.
Right.
So you can go into some dark places with potential outcomes of this renaissance. I think there's going to be more adverse effects, which will be reported in the psychiatric literature. There's going to be more understanding about how psychedelics work. One compound or one type of compound cannot possibly do everything that psychedelics appear to be doing. So there's got to be some fundamental biological, psychological effect, which then can be applied to any number of conditions. It isn't like they're antidepressant or they're anti-OCD or they're anti-addictive. I think there's a more fundamental mechanism that they activate, which then, depending on the set and setting, can be channeled for any number of potential outcomes. So my advice for people taking giant doses, be careful. Get your ducks in a row, and even then, there's no guarantee. And microdosing, I think we just don't know very much at all about microdosing. It seems, safe anyway, but whether it's effective in the way that people believe it's effective, I think the jury is still out.
Right. Yep. We're gonna have to do a lot more than just anecdotal. Try it on ourselves. on the daily. I've been microdosing quite a bit in the last decade, and lately I've been experimenting with microdosing mescaline from the San Pedro cactus. And that's interesting. I feel like it doesn't provide me with any additional awarenesses. It suppresses my appetite, and it makes me feel possibly more compassion creative. Like, how can I show more mercy in the circumstances that I'm facing? And that's like a big deal within Buddhism. You don't necessarily need any substances to like focus on that.
Well, yeah. So how do you think that's working in you? Like, is it because, is that because, that's the way you want to be?
Maybe it is. Maybe it is just an adjunct of who I am inside coming out. And it might also just be a placebo effect of who I am. And I'm taking a very bitter substance. It might have a little bit of nausea to it. And so therefore, I'm being more careful with myself, and thus I'm more careful with how I communicate in my relations.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you are using, something which makes you feel, something, it's like, something's going on. You're taking an active substance. Yeah, it's kind of like, with the question of what kind of subjective experience do you need in order to stop drinking or stop being depressed or whatnot. Is it a mystical experience? Is it a psychotic experience? Is it an ego dissolution? Is it an insight? Is it this or that? I think what is going to turn out to be the case, it's the intensity of the experience is key, and I think the flavor kind of is up to you and the people that are giving you the substance. If you believe an ego dissolving experience will help you, and if the people giving you the drug believe an ego dissolving experience will help you, if they give you a questionnaire that measures ego dissolution, and you want to be less depressed, then chances are the intensity of your ego dissolution is going to be associated with improvement. So I think it's more of the intensity, rather than any specific quality. It's more quantitative, which I think is an indication of some threshold being reached in the mind-brain complex that then activates the innate healing mechanisms in the mind-brain complex.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for unpacking it that way. I'm gonna have to go back and re-listen to that and see how it applies to me on the daily, because that's really I can feel the different stages of consciousness you have to pass through as a scientific researcher in order to fully understand what you just said there.
Yeah, well, one of the more speculative chapters in the book is called, it's a bunch of P's. Let's see. Yeah, psychedelics, panaceas, placebo, and psychoplastogens. Yeah, and it's a pretty dense chapter, and it hits upon, unpacks all those things I just kind of summarized in 2 sentences. The placebo effect, the panaceas, the intensity, the subjective experience, and its relationship to outcome. Yeah, that's one of those chapters that I think could spur future research, as opposed to having a lot of applicability today anyway.
Thank you. Yep, I'm still not done with the book. I've been not cover to cover with it. I've just been fanning through it, read a chapter at a time. I'm going to keep reading it. One of my favorite things to bring to the gym and sit in the sauna, and people are like, "What are you reading there?"
Yeah, well, yeah. Compared to the cover of The Spirit Molecule, what do you think about this cover?
I think it's right for the title, the cover with all the color, like that whole tie-dye feature to it.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I mean, you used the Alex Gray art for the original DMT Spirit Molecule cover, and
right.
that Alex Gray art has been ubiquitous with the psychedelic culture. So I appreciate what that is and how that sort of relates. And that kind of art kind of carried me through in the beginning of my understanding of yoga and Vedanta into more shamanic things, into more entheogenic practices. So one of the ways that I got introduced to your concepts, in addition to taking DMT as one of my very first breakthrough drug experiences, because I hadn't used cannabis or really anything other than prescription drugs as a kid. When I was about 20, 21, I did a 5-methoxy dimethyltryptamine experience, and before that happened, I had been queued up by receiving a book on my birthday that was an Alex Gray artwork book. Mm-hmm. And it was just synonymous with the way my life was going leading up to that breakthrough experience. And so I think you chose the right sequence there. The one book that most perplexes me, and I haven't read your other book, Levi. What was the one title with the Levi?
Yes, it's called Joseph Levi Escapes Death.
Oh, Joseph Levi Escapes Death. I would like to read that because I know you have a flair of comedy in that book.
It's pretty dark humor. It's quite funny. I mean, I still open it and I read something and I chuckle, and yeah. And if you read the reviews on Amazon, most people, everybody is able to pick up on the humor. If you have no sense of humor, then you're going to end up hating the book. And I've gotten some, hate mail from people who just have no sense of humor. They just, can't, see any humor in that protagonist. Yeah, it's an autobiographical novel. I was really sick for about a year in 2014. And I swore if I got through that year, I would write about it. So I was taking a lot of notes. And I worked through the trauma. Like, it's no fun being sick, especially in a small town with a bad hospital. I kind of swore that it was a story to tell if I could.
Well, I'd like to go back and read that. The one that was, I think it's called
Inner Paths to Outer Space.
Yeah, Inner Paths to Outer Space. Where did the art for that come from?
Yeah, it was a friend, a Peruvian artist. His name is Andrew De Bernardi.
Interesting.
And we commissioned that piece of art. It's an anthology. Me, Luis Eduardo Luna, Ed Frexa, and Slavik Vojtovic, an oncologist who's interested in science fiction and psychedelics. Yeah, and we knew Andy, and we said, could you do a piece for the cover? And he said, sure. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I think that's one of your, besides DMT, the Spirit Molecule, that book is probably one of your more popular ones. And then The Soul of Prophecy is maybe on the least popular scale of the trilogy?
Well, I would say the DMT book is the most popular, the Spirit Molecule. And after that is the Prophetic States book.
Oh.
I've been pushing that, through the more religious, interested folks out there. Inner Paths, it has moments or phases where it sells pretty well. But I think I sell more copies of the Prophetic States book now.
Okay. Yeah. So as somebody who is, in my opinion, mystical and elder and wise, how do we keep it light in the society that we have today? Give us some closing words of wisdom, whether they're Jewish or spiritual, open-ended, or Zen. Give us something.
Well, my Zen teacher used to say, if ever you get puffed up with pride, to remind yourself, I could be wrong. And so that's been my motto. Well, it's among a number of mottos, but I like to keep that in mind. I could be wrong. So I think anybody who trips and then decides that they have found the truth with a capital T, I think, then that leads to some trouble.
That's a valuable thing for me to share with people. And I'm glad that it's been recorded in history here for EntheoRadio listeners. Right. And again, Dr. Rick Strassman is here on EntheoRadio. And he is the author and best-selling books, including the new Psychedelic Handbook. Please check out his stuff. What's your website again? Is it dmtspiritmolecule.com?
No, it's rickstrassman.com.
Rick Strassman?
Yeah.
And then the DMT Spirit Molecule documentary, if you want to check it out, it's on YouTube. It's for free. And just when you think you had all the answers, you could be wrong.
You could be wrong. Yeah. That was one of the things I liked about her. She also would, tell people that, pride is the last thing to go. She was really intent on keeping people from getting too puffed up with their attainments.
Right. What did they say in the Christian writ? It's something like pride is greatest before the fall.
Right. Yeah. Pride's interesting. So that's, the last thing to go, and it just may never go. So that being the case, you have to remind yourself that you could be wrong. Yeah, I think anybody who, tells you that, this is what psychedelics do, this is how they work, this is what they reveal, I just don't think you want to pay too much attention to them.
I'm going to be in gratitude for all of the possibilities and the opportunities that exist within the psychedelic space, and then back here in the normal reality space, the waking dream space, because we could not only be wrong, but it could benefit us to be wrong.
Oh yeah. I mean, things change. There are certain eternal truths, I think, but when it comes to people, there's always more to learn.
Absolutely. So once again, thank you, Dr. Rick, for being on the show. EntheoRadio is brought to you by Mushroom Shaman Brand and Alchemy.gold products. You can find us ALKEMI.gold. And you can search mushroomshaman.com or Mushroom Shaman Brand. And then you can find this podcast on YouTube in its video format at a later release time, and just about everywhere audio that you'd like to search for a podcast, ENTHEO Radio. And thanks for listening.